Well, the next step in the government's plan to make tech giants Google and Facebook pay to support news content happens today. The Senate inquiry into the proposal, which heard Google Australia's boss sensationally threaten to pull its search engine out of Australia if the changes went ahead, will table its report. We can speak now to Peter Lewis, Director of the Australia Institute Centre for Responsible Technology. He's on the line from Canberra. Peter, thanks for joining us. I just want to go first to this threat that Google made. It does seem to have rolled back from that.
Yeah, there was a meeting, I think over phone or Zoom, between the CEO of Google and the Prime Minister last week. The rhetoric has softened since, but there has been no public statements from the company. I think the pressure on the government is still there, and there's been mad attempts to negotiate a deal with media companies before the code comes in to avoid being subject to it.
So this next step that's happening today, the Senate inquiry, the Senate committee is going to be making their report. Why is this step important and what happens next?
Well, this is part of the process of legislation going through. The laws were actually introduced into Parliament at the end of the last year. They were then put into committee. The sensational claims were made during the public committee hearings a couple of weeks ago. The timetable now goes, the Senate committee makes its report and recommends any amendments. Then it goes back into the lower house and then back to the Senate for confirmation of law. And that could happen within a matter of weeks.
And given what we've heard from Google, do you expect there to be any changes to the law, any recommendations that committee is going to be making?
Look, the critical one is still the idea that Google search would be included in the code. And the code is like a safety net that sits underneath negotiations to put a value on news within both the Google and Facebook networks. There's been, incredible pushback because it does produce a global precedence. There are some other changes they're seeking, including requirements that they let news companies know when they change their algorithm in a material way that they're also pushing back on.
Your centre has actually done a review of some of the claims that Google made, that it tabled to that committee about its value to the Australian economy, and you've really made some very resounding rejections of that claims. What did they say and what have you assessed?
Well, as part of the evidence, the Google CEO cited some modelling that they'd commissioned that claimed that Google was basically indispensable to the Australian economy, $39 billion a year to business, $14 billion to consumers. But if you unpick the modelling, like a lot of economic modelling, some of the assumptions are a bit iffy. They basically set up a world where either Google exists or it doesn't. For instance, they say that they save the average Australian 4.9 days a year through their search, but the alternative to searching on Google is going to a public library. Likewise, they say they save us heaps of time using Google Maps, where the alternative seems to be using the old Gregory's or UBD. So yeah. So they've really set up a world where it's either Google or bust, which kind of reflects the broader arguments they're making.
Can I just ask you finally, Google last Friday launched its News Showcase platform. This is seen as an attempt to head off the news media bargaining code. Can you just quickly explain for us whether that's going to make any difference, do you think, to the government's thinking, and what it's actually seeking to do with that?
So Showcase is a commercial transaction where the news companies would be paid for a service. What's so globally significant about the media code is, rather than a business deal, it's placing in legislation a system to value the news within their search ecosystem. So look, this is important. The eyes of the world are watching it. It's only the first step in a broader project of digital platform reform that's rolling through the Australian Parliament.
Okay, Peter, we'll wait to see what those recommendations are from the committee. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.